everyone. I'm Gemma Starr, and welcome to another episode of Heart Warriors. Heart Warriors is a series I've been guided and inspired to do thanks to my energetic connection with Katajuda. Katajuda is our beautiful sacred masculine site in Central Australia, very close to Uluru, our sacred feminine site. What I'm here to do is to give a platform to our men so men can speak man to man about their journey into the heart, their experiences, their highs, their lows, insights, wisdom, tools, practices. What have they picked up along the way that they can now share with other men walking this path, and of course us women who are right there beside them. Today's guest is a man called Gair, and Ben is a multidisciplinary facilitator. He's into breath work, emotional release, kinesiology, somatics, counseling. He's an intimacy coach, sex educator, tantric body worker, and energy practitioner. And he hosts and holds space for plant medicine and shamanic ceremonies. So great to have Ben here, and really excited to hear all about Ben's journey into the heart. Enjoy. Hello, Ben. Welcome to Heart Warriors.
Hey, thank you for having me on. It sounds like a fun series, and I've been looking forward to having a chat and opening up to whatever's there to share. I've got definitely an interesting story, and I'm always happy to inform others of what that looks like in my experience and my reality. And I've been in this personal development space for about 20 odd years now, so no stranger to being open and vulnerable with where I come from and what's my story. So looking forward to it.
Oh, I love that. And that's what I think this has evolved into. Every heart warrior that comes on, does have a rock bottom moment. And for other men to witness that and then understand that they all rose out of that gives a lot of hope and I guess inspiration for everyone's journey. But I'd like to start off with you when you're dropped of all your labels. Who is that man inside? How would you describe him?
Ooh. Interesting question. I think I'm just a simple guy wanting to do the best he can in the world. I have a genuine desire to help people understand their own reality, whatever that looks like. I don't really have a judgment of what you choose to focus on, whatever the focal point that you have for your world. But I've got a background in understanding and digesting and helping people get over the limiting beliefs, emotions, and things that may stop them from wanting to be that, because it also came because that's what I needed to do. That's what I wanted to do in my own world, because I needed to change my reality. And so it was always intended as working on myself and wanting to be a better person and a better man and free from the backstory of what got me here and who I want to become. And that led down some interesting roads. So I think I'm just I like being in nature. I like just very simple stuff. I've traveled quite extensively. I'm fascinated by people and culture and things like that. So it's always this drive to know more and be fascinated by the world that we're in. And that often looks like pulling it to pieces and understanding how it works and at least in my reality. And if that helps others understand their own, then even better, because that's what I want to support.
This is great. And I love that what you touched on, we've got this drive to help others through our own experience and our own journey. And of course, that wisdom that we've gained, I think is worth so much more than any knowledge that, someone can read in a book, for our own individual journey as well. So of course, books help, but, to hear it straight from something that we know has worked. But let's get into that little boy Ben and his reality. What was going on there? What was his main challenge in?
I think this was kind of confusing for me for a long time. I kind of grew up in a pretty stable home. No particular traumas, as I would say, were present in the early stages at all. parents were together till I was, I think, in my late teens, early 20s. So they separated then. But yeah, we traveled a bit. We had probably low income coming up to medium to high as I got older, but it was nothing too out of the ordinary. And that's why when I had quite a lot of issues in my late teens, early 20s, intellectually trying to look back, it's like, well, I can't see that anything happened as such that led me to want to escape the world. But that was a definite drive and a definite desire to not want to be here. And so that got a little confusing for me. I knew I didn't want to go down standardized psychology, so I just was kind of doing my own thing. So to point a finger on something specific was difficult to me, especially into my journey and understanding self. And it was more just my dad was very driven by his business, which meant he was kind of absent because he was just trying to build a company, and it was international. And it was became quite wealthy within that process, but it meant that he wasn't home, and I was the only child, so it left me without some of that figure some of the time, and I became quite attached to mum, and sort of being definitely more on her side. I was never kind of the sports kid, like I was never athletic and sporty, much to my dad's dismay. He was quite the sports person. So we never could relate on that level, whereas I was much more artistic, creative, and that's my mum. So there was a lot more bond there. And yeah, him being away, it was just how it was. So yeah, there's not a lot I can really say about what happened. It was just been through the process of understanding that I think a lot of our issues in life and misinterpretations of what was reality, because we're young and we don't understand yet, and we're unable to see objectively reality for what it is, because we're just in it. We have needs and wants and things at the time, but because our young brains are unable to process it other than our immediate needs and wants, we create a story. And that's all I can really say about sort of childhood. It was fine. It was fine. It was nothing, not a lot to say there.
You said something happened. It was all fine until you got to your later teens. So what was happening around?
Yeah, it was just I went to an all boys Catholic high school. Brought up kind of Catholic, religiously. Not too strong, but strong enough that it was a thing. And so I went to an all boys Catholic high. I mean, there was a little bit of bullying and stuff throughout both early, preschool and high school. Because again, I didn't fit the mold of what others were doing. I was always happy to be an individual and just do my own way. Big into heavy metal, and it was pretty much my outlet, but also made me an outcast in my school because I was pretty much one of the only few ones that was. I also came out as not wanting to be Catholic pretty early on and didn't believe in it. And in a religious school, that became a bit of an issue. So that was interesting. And yeah, again, I don't really, no event happened that caused me to go down a self-destructive path, but it was just sadness, some kind of depression, loneliness on some kind of a level that I didn't know how to deal with. I didn't have an outlet for. And I didn't start doing sort of drugs or alcohol until I was 18, pretty much. And then it was like, oh, I found the thing that numbs all that pain, so of feeling alone, I suppose. And anything was just a distraction from just being where I was. And yeah, sort of after 18, it became sort of quite downhill into a self-destructive path. Then, as I say, now that I was an adult and I left school, which was a great thing for me. I didn't do great in an all boys high school scenario. I felt really unbalanced and unable to communicate with the opposite sex in many ways, because I just missed that formative functional years of learning something different, and I was kept in a little echo chamber, and we didn't have a sister school. We didn't have a time with females at all. And it just really stunted, I feel, my understanding of the world and reality. And that's later why I certainly started to look into areas like sexuality and all that kind of stuff. Because it didn't serve me that well. And certainly when I came out of school, I went into design college and started interacting with females as well. And I probably had some kind of unconscious, needy desire to be seen or connect with women. Coming from a horny teenage, perspective of like how we're biologically built. And I got a lot of rejection, and it was kind of like probably from being a bit weird. And it was kind of always, drugs don't reject me and alcohol doesn't reject me. Or it gave me the confidence to even start the conversation, not that the conversation ever went where I was hoping it would or wanted to. And I get that now I had an agenda or something like that. And it was probably felt because even if it was not about sex, it was just like wanting to connect and be seen and understood. And it probably, made it feel uncomfortable to some. So rather than kind of keep going down that road, I just kind of doubled down into, as I say, I came from a very heavy metal background and really loved that scene, and it felt like my emotional outlet place. But it also meant that I was doing a lot of shit at the time, and it was, pretty self-destructive. I kind of had a few overdoses by the age of 21, and pretty much anything and everything. There was not moments I was ever sober. So it was really a desire to not want to be here and feel whatever I was feeling, because I just didn't know. I didn't, know how to handle it or have a healthy outlet for being able to deal with it. So I moved out on my own and kind of started to just live how I wanted to. And that's when I felt I really started to understand at least my world, because, there was always wants and desires for my parents to me to be something that I just wasn't. And I felt like I wasn't seen, and I kept being corralled and pushed into an area that just wasn't me at all. And as much as I respect my dad for kind of pursuing his business world and his business life and kind of curating this multinational company, his expectation was that I would take that on. And it was so far from my reality. I went into art school, design school, and then film school, and he's expecting me to do business and become CEO of a shipping freight forwarding company. And it's just like, have you met me? And so I felt, well, no, fuck it. I'm just going to do me and live my life on my terms. Whether that was good or not was irrelevant. It's like I needed to, again, break away from what I felt was like a little smothering area of home life growing up, to, okay, now let's push the boundaries of what it means to be Ben and what it means to kind of live my life on my terms. And that meant, just doing whatever I wanted to, whenever I wanted to. And it wasn't overly amazing, but it was, I always thought that if I had gone down the path that was laid out for me, it would have been even more depressing, because I almost killed myself living what I thought was fun. Whereas if I'd done something I was initially hating just for the money, then I would have hated it even more. So it was not a life I envied or wanted to ever have. So no regrets on choosing the path I did.
This is fascinating, Ben, and so many different directions we could go in. But I want to go back to the Catholic school and try and get things chronologically. Now, when you look back at that from the perspective you have now, as an adult man and trained as sex educator, and you've obviously done a lot of reflection on this. Let's dive a bit deeper into, first of all, why you didn't feel comfortable in that religious space. And at that time, did you replace it by spirituality, or was there a void? And then I'd also like to roll into your opinions now of all boys schools or all girls schools, but let's focus on all boys schools, and the advantages, the pros, the cons, and yeah, what does that do to a boy? As you said, you know, it separated you from girls, which, from what you're saying, you didn't see as something healthy. Can we bring up that conversation, please?
Yeah, sure. So I'll just start with the whole my experience with religion. I as I say, I kind of grew up my dad's much more Catholic, still is now. Mum sort of has deviated as they separated. She deviated away, probably more into a spiritual perspective of life. And so I didn't really know anything different. And I suppose I always thought it was an analogy. I remember distinctly at some point in high school, not realizing people thought that this was a true story or an actual reality, that this guy had some kind of weird magical powers and was doing things around the world and or around the area, and had such an influence on the world. And I just thought they were basic tenets of life, like do no harm to others and don't steal and kill and all that kind of stuff. I thought they were admirable traits, obviously, that we all have an inherent desire for, I think. But I didn't believe the story. I didn't realize other people believed it as much as they did, even kids my age. And I just remember being a bit stunned that people had gone into this story thinking it was 100% factual, and this was the reality 2,000 odd years ago, whatever it is. And it has shaped so much of reality. And kind of being a bit into history and things like that, I kind of seen the problems religion had caused in the world, and the Crusades and all kinds of just terrible stories of conquer or kill, as colonizing parts of the world where indigenous knowledge was kind of lost. And I found that quite confusing as to this religion that preached love in some way. And I had it was a brothers school, like a Morris brothers school. So we had sort of brothers, monks, some kind of, who've just dedicated their life to obviously whatever order they're chosen. And me just being super curious, I would ask a million questions, and then I'd kind of get kicked out of class for causing a disruption because it was like, now you're disturbing us learning. I'm like, well, if isn't this the point of like me trying to understand like what you're trying to get across? Because I didn't. And when they couldn't answer simple questions of the meaning of life, or simple questions, from their perspective of why they had chosen the path that they had chosen, why they had gone down, dedicating their life to God or this religion or whatever, I found it quite confusing that they didn't even know themselves. And so that kind of instilled in me even more confirmation that I was on the right path in my world. And that caused me to, and we had to have religious classes. I ended up reading the Bible cover to cover a couple of times. Just saw gaping holes at times where it was like one way, one section, and another way, another section. And I just didn't find it very cohesive or inspirational often as well. So I ended up reading a bunch of other religions because I had to have class, and often if I wasn't kicked out, I'd just kind of do my own thing and look in my own areas of yeah, desire to find spirituality, my own kind of version of what spirituality meant to me. And yeah, read a bunch of sort of Judaic texts. And then Wiccan, I got into kind of witchcraft and stuff like that. I was a super nerdy kid who was into Dungeons and Dragons and kind of fantasy and all this kind of stuff. So I was into looking at the more magical side of life. So I kind of delved a little bit into that area, and even things like, not because I wanted to become it, but satanic religion. And I found that was just the mirror opposite of whatever Catholic was saying, like just as rigid, just as off track as in my perspective. But it was an interesting perspective to look at and do what they will, as opposed to kind of whatever the Catholic version of that would have been, like disciplining, I suppose. And I just found fundamental flaws all over the place. And I think probably the only one that it really resonated with me was the Wiccan part, and sort of Buddhism of again, basic tenets of life, and everything has a spirit, as I kind of saw it in the land and nature. And I found these much more my gods, what I saw as higher powers, I suppose, maybe you want to call it. But they resonated more with me. And so rather than ever calling myself a label again to this point, I just went my own path of seeing everything as an expression of God. And I don't even love the word God, but it because it has a loaded meaning, but then it also has power as well. So it's yeah, it's my own version now. And sometimes I use the word to invoke something, but I'm also intentional about not always using it. But I have my own experience with whatever I experience as God. And I have zero desire to tell anyone that my version is right and that it is the way, or it's just my understanding, and I'm happy with that, and that's all I need from my experience with
Yeah,
divinity on that level.
yeah, you just, you obviously went on a pilgrimage, and just sort of got so much information and picked and chose, cherry picked, what you wanted, and made your own sort of reality. Yeah, because that's exactly what I did as well. So let's get into this all boys schools. What are give it to us, the good, the bad, the evil?
Yeah, yeah, I don't really agree with it now, for sure. I mean, I was there from 13 till 18. And they're the very much formulative years of understanding who you are as a human being. I mean, yeah, because you're starting to critically think, or you're adult enough now that you're able to have your own understanding of the world. I suppose probably primary school, the first 5 till 12 or whatever it is. You're just being fed information and you're digesting the reality that's given to you. Whereas you're starting to own your own reality from 13 to 18, as I see it. And because I didn't have that, I'm very into polarity now. I didn't have that other side of the coin as a feedback for so my communication and being able to connect with women just was terrible until a lot later, until I started doing therapy in reality, because as I say, I had the agenda or whatever, but it's just even the fundamental basics of having friendships and things like that. I didn't get so much. So I felt that there's a lack. I understand the perspective of that boys and girls learn differently. And
Oh,
yeah, so I see males and females learn differently, and that was kind of the initial reason why they kept schools separately. I can't speak to that because I haven't studied enough the psychology of who it's created and what kind of people, and done across the board studies of it. I can only speak from my experience in saying I felt like a fundamental loss that took me a long time to consciously regain later, as I didn't know how the opposite sex sort of worked, operate, thought. As simple as that may seem, it was just a dysfunctional way to have an upbringing, as in my experience. It's kind of all I can kind of say about the pros of it. From a logical point of view, I know that developmental ages are different between males and females, so I get it. Intellectually, I get it. And I get that boys in cliques or boys with the distractions, because I can only speak from that point of view, it may be a bit harder, but it's the only experience I've got. And so any other pros and cons to it as an experience? It was mostly cons for me, as I say. I feel like I missed a pretty functional developmental part of life for a long time. That took me a while to kind of catch back up again. And maybe when I get into talking about sexuality later, I can share a bit more on my experience there. But yeah, I think for schools, separating schools, that's my experience with that. And obviously we didn't have any kind of men's initiations or men's work that actually made it more valuable than another experience. So it was just segregation is how I saw it. There was no additional benefit that I got from being in the environment that I'm aware of, because that's all I can really say.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. Let's jump back now to when you were spiraling down with drugs and alcohol. What was your rock bottom moment there, and how did you start spiraling up from that cocktail of addiction?
Yeah, as I say, there was not a lot of time I was ever sober, and that was most of the day, every day. And it was definitely just, I don't want to be here, or just takes the edge off everything, and I can just kind of feel a bit more functional having to do whatever. And I still studied. I went to, as I say, design college, film television college, and I had a job, and it was not like I was dysfunctional. It was just to function, I needed to kind of be a bit altered on a pretty regular basis, as I saw it anyway.
What drugs were you taking?
I pretty much had everything. Drinking was probably my biggest. That was a pretty constant. Smoked a lot of pot. Did a lot of everything else. Didn't really like anything else. Was never into stimulants. It's like I need to slow down more than I need to speed up. Probably just because I was very in my head and overthinking everything at best of times. Psychedelics, things that made me think, I think were always the ones that got me interested, because I contemplated what I saw as reality or life, which I then later went on to work with psychedelics quite extensively. So I kind of understand that they sparked my curiosity for things, but it was kind of anything and everything at the time. There was just a lot of things I didn't really gravitate towards, thankfully, in any way. Opiates were definitely not my thing, but I tried it all, and it was just, whatever I could do at the time. There was no kind of filter of like, oh, this is bad for me, or I don't want to do that, or it was just like, yeah. And like, I even credit sort of ecstasy is one of the big things that opened my heart, like in weird ways. There was lots of things that I felt I didn't have experiences before without having a chemically induced experience. I think just the depression was closing in big time. This is probably about 2021, early 22, which is when I started to actually consciously have a look at myself. Sorry, was there another question in there?
No, well, I was just interested in what drugs you were into, because then, like, asked your rock bottom moment and how you started to get.
Yeah, it was the rock bottom bit. Yeah, and interestingly enough, because again, I'd kind of kept on this vague little bent in the background of being curious by spirituality or something higher than what I was. And again, probably the drug experiences had showed me something way outside of myself that was curious, which is probably something I was chasing on some level. But made me even more curious about what the religious or the spiritual experience was, having read a lot about it throughout school, but then kind of still having had this kind of weird little, dismissed everything, was completely openly atheist by this time. But obviously there was something in me that was like a little niggling, you want to know something's more than this. And funnily enough, it was a tarot reading I went to. I honestly take the piss out of it and dismiss it as another thing I didn't really believe in. And it was at a pretty rock bottom point, and I was just wanting to know that life would be okay or some kind of an answer. And I think it was just with a friend. It was a half an hour reading at a local store. Didn't pay much attention to it, but obviously went along with it. And she's like, "Oh, you're going to be this great healer and you've got this great gift." And I'm just like, "I'm an alcoholic in a hardware store. I have no idea what you're talking about. This means absolutely nothing to me." But she was so accurate on a bunch of like people that were around me, down to clothes they were wearing. She had some true gift. And it just blew my mind, that made me question reality again. And because of psychedelics and sort of smoking a lot of pot and things like that, I'd always kind of wanted this deeper understanding of what it was and what all these people had gravitated towards in history, and what that actually meant. I'd looked into a lot of esoteric stuff and books that had been written about it. No experience of it, didn't really believe it, but I was fascinated by it. And then I just had an old friend that we used to smoke pot and watch horror movies with, and hadn't seen him in a few years, and kind of he was the only one in my world that really I could have those kind of weirder kind of conversations, that I would have called weird at the time anyway, about aliens and life and God and stuff, and knowing that he'd done quite a lot of drugs himself. And I kind of got in contact with him, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I always knew that about you, that you're really psychic and that you've got some kind of gift." And I'm like, "What does it mean?" And it turned out he was a breath worker. And that's kind of how I really got started on having a look when I was 22. And for me, it was like a big deal that he's like, "Yeah, you got to be sober for like 3 days before a one-on-one session." And I was like, "What? I don't know if I can do this, man." And I remember that first session was like, first time I had acid, it was like, how does breath do that to you? Put you in such an altered state that I had only got chemically, that made me fascinated by what was the human experience and what are we? What is any of this? And directly took me into memories, directly took me into childhood stuff, stories, seeing full visions of my experience and wondering, okay, I've got to know this. And I dove into multiple sessions and then a year training with him. He was just about to start teaching, and I did a year's training, and I went on to do many more years and be a facilitator with him and all kinds of other stuff along the way. But that's sort of the beginning of where it just got from rock bottom to let's have a look and turn it around.
This is great. Now, breath work. I love what you said that, with all this chemical experience you had of highs and well lows, and then you got into breath work and it gave you, a comparable, if not even better experience. Now, I've dabbled in breath work, haven't done much, but this really interests me and actually invites me to want to explore it more. So I mean, are there any simple techniques you can share with us now that could take us to a higher state and get us to get a peek into this breath work?
Yeah, I just want to kind of fill in a little bit there that sort of when I had met a few years after that, I did a lot of breath work. We end up having to do, I think it was 100 sessions in a year. And then I went on to, we were doing workshops almost 40 weekends a year, plus students, plus 7-day retreats, all kinds of stuff at the time. And whereas facilitating either supporting others or my own process. And even when I was sitting for people, I would start to hallucinate and get into their visions. And I through my first year of training, I still had substances, but I think I just reduced it to alcohol and pot at the time. And it was like once a week or once a fortnight, I think, respectively, on those two things. And it was a big difference. I just knew that unpacking as much stuff as I was at the time, I probably couldn't have done completely sober, but I did. On the final graduate dinner, I went sober for pretty much 2 years. That was my last outing that I had any substance of any kind. And the next day, I changed everything. And then, as I say, when I had ayahuasca many years later, I felt like I went into the exact same place, like as breath work, which I found fascinating. And a lot of the studies that are out now about DMT, the spirit molecule, and stuff like that, weren't published, or certainly weren't in my awareness. And I started to feel like the ayahuasca took me to the same realm. So DMT must have been in breathwork somewhere. And when DMT, the spirit molecule, came out, he was talking about how he thought that DMT was inherent in being produced in the lungs, which I found kind of fascinating. Seems to be maybe not so much the case now, but it really took down a rabbit hole of, I'm positive now that most, even old religious experiences, certainly like any of the miracles or stories from the Bible, which again I had kind of read extensively, made a bit more sense if they were hallucinatory experiences. And it made me wonder, because often DMT, which is that molecule, goes into religious places, into God, kind of connecting with God places. And it just really sort of started to fascinate me because I had, on breath work, I had seen angels and all kinds of entities, and really dived into a very shamanic sort of place with it. It was, yeah, hundreds of sessions myself, and witnessing thousands pretty much up until now. And there is this, as a very basic practice, the way that I do breath work very much, and what I like about breathwork is it's very self-generated. You know, I see a lot of people working on other people these days, as the spiritual industry is much bigger than it was 20 years ago. I don't believe you can go into anybody else's energy and fix anything for them, because it's yours. You created it. You have to own that. Whether it's right or wrong, it's installed by you. Even if it was influenced by an external source, like some kind of abuse or something like that, you still either choosing to hold on to it in a certain kind of way, or you've made a belief up about it, and so therefore operating from the belief pattern that was created from the instance of whatever it was. So the breathwork I do, to be as effective as I know it is much more of an in-person experience, because as your resistance comes up and as any of your traumatic experiences or things come more to the surface, I mean, we suppress everything for a reason, because you weren't able to deal with it in the first place. You know, so your brain decompartmentalizes that part of your brain, to shut it away, to kind of go, yeah, we're not cool to deal with that. The best way is to kind of put it away at first so you can keep functioning, but then slowly unpack it in time to healthily reintegrate it back into your being so that it's no longer a trauma that's holding you back, or creating a belief system around, I can't do X because of X. So as your stuff starts to come up, you start to breathe less, and at its most extreme, you can kind of go unconscious because you will either just fall asleep or you'll just inhibit your breathing to a place that it's not going to start moving the emotions like it should. So the only real practice I can say that starts to open up breath and what it means, there's two different kinds of breath. It's always, for me and the way I work, there's different kinds. You'll find box breath and all kinds of other things, but there's two kinds in that you either have nasal breathing or you have mouth breathing. And if you mouth breathe, and it's always connected, so there's always a cyclical cycle of, as soon as you inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale, because you don't want to create the gap in between, because that again causes you to create resistance. There is other practices again where you do 4 by 4 by 4 or some kind of box breath or time thing, that they're probably a bit more in the yogic traditions that have a bit more text on that. But in our experience, and again, one of the original breathworks was invented by a psychologist who was working with LSD, and when LSD became illegal in the early 70s, late 60s, whatever it was, Stanislav Grof, he wanted to figure out how he could work with people in an altered state without having access to LSD. And so he created holotropic breathwork. And his recognition was that a certain kind of people going into repressed memories, they would breathe a certain kind of way. So when he didn't have the LSD, and same with Leonard Orr, the school that I come from, he was looking for keys to immortality. He was a bit more on the sort of yogic traditions, and he found that putting someone in hot water till it was uncomfortable and making them stay beyond that started to hallucinate and go into repressed memories. And he found that they breathed a certain kind of way. And once he took the water away and made them breathe that way, and it's water to womb temperature, it's not traumatic experience. It was just uncomfortable, that part where you just want to get out because I don't want to do this anymore. Because actually because memories are starting to come up. So again, when the things are really there, you're wanting to escape it for a reason, because it was a traumatic experience potentially. And therefore, unless you consciously go into it to unpack it, you may not want to induce that without pre-warning. So this is where this cyclical breath idea started to come from. And so in my experience, the nasal breathing, so keeping the connected, is great for clearing the mind. If you've got a really busy mind, or if you're just wanting to meditate, or just if you're in any kind of situation where you feel the mind is too busy, you can pretty much endlessly do nasal breathing without bringing up too much too quick. But the mouth breathing, because it gets into our lungs. Lungs is often where we store a lot of trauma, but particularly grief is a biggie. But emotions are often connected to the lungs. And so as much as I can say that, you can go and experiment with it, you honestly won't do too much harm, because you'll often knock out before anything really drastically starts to happen. But keeping connected mouth breathing will start to take, so if something's just happened and you feel traumatized, that's often when I slip into, okay, this is too much, but I need to be here and I need to regulate right now. I'll slip into, like, if you've got fear responses or things like that, something big is happening right around you, I often slow right down, go straight into my breath, and just bring the awareness to that as I clear in the moment, as opposed to packing it in a little box, putting it away and looking at it later. I can kind of maintain equilibrium not that there isn't stuff being created, but I can create more of an opportunity to clear in the moment and keep moving forward in a more level-headed way. So I don't know if there was enough there in what you asked to to cover techniques, but yeah.
So I know it's such an extensive topic, but if we can just give a little tips out to help people in the moment, that's just more tools for people's tool boxes. What would you say is the main issue that men are dealing with at the moment in your professional experience?
So I think the world is becoming very confused at the moment in all reality. I think the lines of blurring masculine, feminine, because we all have both. Like we always have polarity. We have both masculine and feminine within us. I see a lot of the agenda at the moment is redefining what is male and female, which I don't really agree with. I'm totally open to everyone having any expression they want. It doesn't matter. I don't care what you choose to be in this world, but having a clear understanding of your own internal masculine and feminine is more important than looking at male and female. I think we're biologically hardwired to a degree. It's a tricky area, and I'm censoring myself constantly at the moment because I know what I mean and I don't want it to be taken out of context, but the fact that this is even a thought process these days shows where we're at. And I think, yes, we needed to probably balance masculine and feminine, male and female energies on the planet. I feel that that's an important thing. And I'm glad that we've got over many kinds of sexuality parts that are negative or holding people back, that they feel they couldn't express themselves freely. But I feel it's getting slightly into an unhealthy area now of everything's okay in every moment, and there's less consciousness around where these things come from and how to healthily balance those kinds of energies. And men's work and women's work is different, you know. Whatever you choose to identify as, or whatever is important to you, is irrelevant. There are certain stages in our individual process that are inherently what you are. And I think, as much as it's great to see more openness in the world, I think we're losing important traditions of what these things mean, and initiations and all that kind of healthy aspects of coming into different stages in life. I can only speak from as a male's point of view, you know, never having that initiatory process, as I have later done them in my work, finding how important they were for defining my identity. And this is, as I say, what I think seems to be like. It seems like there is an erasure of identity, full stop, in the name of inclusiveness for everything, but it's to the cost of there is no longer identity. And I don't find that a healthy or a good thing. So finding healthy outlets for men, I think, is super important. And again, whatever that looks like for you is determined by you, because there is many expressions of male. It's not all alpha sports, you know, chest beating kind of. How do we approach things from that level? It's just the expression that you have as your own individual being needs to be balanced within itself, of where am I coming from? What energy am I choosing to invoke in this moment, whether it's masculine or feminine? And for what purpose? So it's about the consciousness behind you being in whatever state you're in. So stop it being an unconscious, like I'm just operating because this is what society deems, this is what I'm supposed to be. I need to be X, Y, Z. No, you can be anything in any moment. It's just where are you coming from and why? And as soon as we start to bring that into a healthy relationship, I think that's important. And so the sort of the old traits of, big boys don't cry and shutting down emotions, I think is important. But let's recognize that that's part of our internal feminine. And so while it's good not to bottle up all our stuff and let it come out sideways, because if it's not healthily expressed, it's going to have an outlet somehow, and usually in an unhealthy way. So, yeah, I think it's good that we're able to let men be men now, but choosing it consciously as I am going to be in this energy now because it's going to propel me forward as a better human being, not as a man, as whatever you want to identify as, but as what's the most healthy expression of my highest being right now, and utilizing the tools that are there to express what is.
Yeah, this is great. And you said as you were growing up, you were more in that, not into the tough sports, more into that creative, maybe more feminine side. Would you
Yeah.
say that? So at what point did you find your authentic truth as a man? And if that was more on the feminine side, how do you become balanced and incorporate that ultimately balanced state of healthy masculinity and healthy femininity, but to find within the authentic point on the spectrum of polarity? Like, how does a man find that?
And this is why it's back to an individual process. At the end of the day, no one can tell you what's the right and wrong for you. I can only tell you what my experience was. When I went through all the breath work and really started to become me, and then I started to, sober up, I was quite clean by then. There was some kind of glaring point that I felt was out of integrity, and it was my sexuality. I was a virgin until I was 26, and I'd kind of just let it go because it was just not. I needed to get my mind right. And then when I got my mind right, I was like, okay, I need to have a look at this. So I'm not unhealthy. I was getting a lot of female clients with sexual abuse stuff, which made me also kind of go, I really need it. So I held a clear space for it, clearly, because obviously they went there in sessions with me that they may not with others. So I found that kind of not confronting, but it was like something I needed to have a look at. And I didn't want to have any kind of weird tendrils going out that I had some kind of sleazy energy, or that I needed to rebalance myself. And that's how I got into sexuality and tantra. And I was actually doing that work before I ever had sex as well. So I started to, and very much my first male teacher was men and men have sex with women. That's it. He had no binaries, no nothing. And while he was a good master energy, I do recognize that he was definitely psychologically unhealthy, would probably be a nice way of saying that. He had agendas, and he definitely had story, and he definitely wasn't the most integrous or healthy of people that I've ever experienced. But it really made me kind of go, okay, I need to dive into his understanding of reality. And as much as like he was just like constantly have sex with women all day, did you want to get rejected as a man, and this is your purpose, and blah blah blah. I didn't go to that extent, but I started to learn what the masculine penetrative energy was. And I kind of went down that path for quite a while, and then I started to, I had a few years away from it because I fell in love with a partner at the time, and was very much like wanting to have that as my monogamous experience and all this kind of stuff. Later, I got back into sexuality again, and I got quite involved with ISTA, which is an organization that teach a lot more polarity. And I felt like I had a lot more mastery over my masculine energy by this point, but hadn't had a healthy representation of anyone saying you can be in your feminine within the same body and have that experience as well. So as much as I'd had the softer, more feminine style within me, I felt that it was great to build that masculine so that I had the choice to now again navigate from that penetrating life, going into things with that rigidity and healthy aspect of masculine, tethered by things that I naturally gravitated to, art and music and kind of things that would maybe traditionally be considered more on the feminine side. But yeah, when I started to do a lot of work with Ista, I then had a relationship with the two parts of me individually, internally. And they had their own personalities or their own distinct ways of being. And I started to create the marriage between the two, is my experience of it. And now it's always duality in my world. It's always working with the two. So it's often like creating structure, needing to do things. I need to use the masculine to set those up to create healthy boundaries with myself, rather than being free flow, let everything come and just intuition and things like that, dictating how I navigate. I create structure and boundaries with the masculine, but then let my internal feminine free within that space, because I often also use my intuition and stuff like that to have sessions and figure out where people's blocks are and how I help clients when I'm doing sessions and stuff like that. I rely heavily on that perception that I've got. So if I was so rigid in the masculine, I would imagine I would put some kind of blocks around it, or it would only be in a narrow channel that I could use those kinds of abilities. So yeah, it's often a bit of checking in with myself. You know, it's very much part of that shamanic process as well, that it's like, which part of me is reacting to a certain scenario? Is it my masculine or is it my feminine? How am I going to approach this scenario? Is it with my masculine, with my feminine? It's often that for me these days. It's not, and I think that's a far healthier approach of just being a human. Like we all are, and we've all got our stuff, and maybe we choose to balance in one way or the other. That's totally fine. To me, I like to be balanced overall. Not close any channel to what I could be. It's about developing my strengths and areas, because there's no point in me headbutting a wall that's not going to move. So I think it's great to be able to cultivate both, to the healthy degree that you're able to implement either in any scenario, because some ways are going to be better than others in dealing with certain situations. And that's just how it is. So yeah, I think it's a navigation. It's a constant navigation. But yeah, the more you lean into your strengths, and there's a certain amount you can challenge your weaknesses or challenge areas that are important, but there's no point being all things to all everything, all people, all stuff, because you're inherently going to be good at stuff or potentially not good at stuff. And while there's wiggle room to get better and have more mastery, some things just may never be you, and that's okay.
Yeah, this is great, Ben. It's a subject that we've spoken a lot about in this series, and you've probably given the most in-depth through your personal experience, view of that. So thank you. So I love this. And I always say too, even within us women, we've got to have our healthy masculine, our healthy feminine, to be in our feminine, but always know if we need it, that, our healthy masculine is there should we need it. Okay, so let's play this dynamic now out into relationships, seeing you are a intimacy coach, right?
And just quickly, I just wanted to jump in there as something that came to me, that like the issues of today. I think in trying to overcorrect, we've become imbalanced as the world has moved away from, women are at home, stay at home, and be the caretakers of the house and raise children and blah, blah, blah. And they've moved more into the workplace. They're adopting a masculine role, in that, and has often been detrimental to them as well. And this is where the softening of the masculine has also dropped the ball as well. And I've also looked very heavily into things like endocrine disruptors, like plastics in our environment, feminizing us. And when women get over estrogenized, which is often what plastics do, and the pill and all sorts of other things, when there's too much estrogen in female, they actually turn more masculine. And when there's too much estrogen in males, they turn feminine. So there really is I just want to kind of bring up that in this course correcting and being a more holistic, healthy society, which I totally agree with, the roles, while being less defined, haven't necessarily become healthier. And I think a lot more people are struggling in a lot more ways without the structures. And I'm not saying that it should be rigidly imposed that X is X and Y is Y. I think there just needs to be this healthy integration of like what's actually better for you as a whole or society as an entity.
Oh, definitely. It's a great area to get into. And, I mean, my personal belief is that was used as a weapon. Now, but we've only got just over half an hour left. So I sort of, want to make the most of our time and not maybe get into that area, but, just to bring awareness to that way that has played out within the last maybe, 50, 70 years. Well, probably since World War II, I like to see it, even before then. But anyway, so let's take that masculine, feminine balance within the individual. How does that now play out in a relationship, in a healthy relationship? Because it's my understanding that if both are at 50-50, you've got no attraction. It's more a friendship. So how does one play polarity out into a couple?
I'm not sure that will always be 50-50. Again, you may have a nature that is the dominant, but it's bringing awareness and healthy developing of whatever the opposite is. And that could be your biological sex. It could not be your biological sex. I don't think it's really necessarily to say that men are men and women are women. I'm very much of the idea that there is always balance. So if I don't really believe there's 50-50, like we can maybe maintain 50-50 at a point, but we will naturally slip into the 70-30 or 60-40 or whatever it is, and that's just our baseline. We can do a bunch of work to pull them into evenness or balance the other way because you're doing a task that requires it, but you naturally are X a certain way. And so I find that we're always attracting our poles because we're always wanting the bit that we don't have, or seeking the opposite that is informing our deeper self or our soul of the bit that we either need to pay more attention to or that balances us out. And I think that's more where I'm coming from, and my understanding of it. And yeah, I've definitely had some very masculinized partners, but because again, I can kind of sometimes be in the feminine a bit, but it's about reading the situation and knowing when and where and how. And I've had, and if you've got two people doing the work and looking at their own internal and balancing their own internal masculines and feminines, you've now got four entities playing in a two-person square. And you're able to pick the energies right for a situation, whether that's consciously or unconsciously. It's like you're going and you need to do something, and I'm the masculine and I want to lead, and I want to lead my partner in a certain kind of way, in certain kind of places. I will immediately just gravitate into that because I recognize safety, or I want to be the protector, or whatever that story is. And then maybe in the downtime, I slip more into the other because that's the nature of my work, or who I am, or whatever it is. And I've never really had much of an issue with it feeling imbalanced or unattractive, because I know when to be what's necessary, or when. I don't know if that's a great explanation. Or does that cover what you asked?
Yeah, it's all about just feeling into every individual situation. When we do reach a certain point on our healing journey, we do trust our inner state of being. If we're in a happy, expansive heart place, that's exactly, the right place for us to be. Now, Ben, you've got so much.
Everyone needs to take personal responsibility for their own stuff. Like that's part of everything. It's like if you're not happy with something the way it is, what are you doing to change it? How do you make an effort to make a difference of your experience? If the partner is not providing the polarity that you need, then are you in the right relationship? Or like questioning, you chose to be there as well, or you chose the situation as it is, or you're choosing to look at something or not looking at something else. So yeah, personal responsibility always comes back to one of the biggest elements of whatever you do, however you navigate life. And if you're not happy with your experience, why not? And then how are you going to change it?
Yeah, I love that. So we've got about half an hour left. And I just want to make sure nothing gets left unsaid from your beautiful range of broad experience. So what needs to be brought into this conversation that you can offer to men around man masculinity, the healing journey?
Yeah, I do think there needs to be a recognition that you're made up of the feminine as well. Regardless of how you want to be perceived by the world, or how you choose to show up in the world, how you want to navigate your reality, that exists within you. And I'm not saying wallow in it to the point that you don't feel like you're in the masculine anymore, but that you have a healthy, again, ability to dip into whatever is required at any moment. Because rigidly holding on to a way because you've labeled yourself masculine, to the neglect of the feminine, is not holistic. It's not healthy. It's not going to bring healing to the bits that need to be healed. And we all have that. We all have stuff that we're working on. We're all wanting to be better humans at the end of the day. I feel, at least I hope that's where many people are coming from, especially if they're listening to this. And so rigidly holding on to any concept about anything in reality it's a choice. And it could be confirmation bias, or it could be you've chosen a way, and that's okay. But always being open to, what am I missing by being X? Because there's always polarity. There's always a cost and benefit of all things. So yeah, don't be too rigid, I think, is the only main message there for the masculine that are always identifying in that way. That's totally fine. Again, no judgment about who chooses to be what. It's just being able to at least acknowledge that there is another side of you, that otherwise you're abandoning bits of self. And maybe you don't want to go into the degree that I have. That's totally fine. And no one's asking you to. But being able to shore up both the polarities within you and start to balance the system that you have, that works for you, because there's no right or wrong. It's still your experience at the end of the day. It's just, how do you want to perceive the world? How do you want to be how do you be perceived? And what's important? Like, what's your soul's journey in this life to embody? What does that mean to you? Just being honest with ourselves is often one of the most hardest things to do, because being honest with self is going to create change. And that could be uncomfortable, because it's like, I am out of balance here because of I've taken on this belief of X. And so as we start to become healthier human beings, we're going to have to stretch into areas that may not be comfortable or common or our always lived experience, and start to challenge what can be.
Yeah. And you, as a intimacy coach and sex educator, what are the issues mostly at the moment around men and sexuality and intimacy?
So a few things. Part of the male's problem, masculine problem, I don't know. It's thinking too far ahead. Because, and this is if I'm ever talking to males with like premature ejaculation problems or stuff like that, it's because you're not present to the moment. It's end result driven. It's goal driven. It's like being too far in the masculine. And so this is a game where it comes back to balance of, you need to be slowed down and present enough in your feelings, which could be considered a feminine trait, but to be present to the other, because this is not just about you. It's about blending all of the energies that are there, both your masculine and your feminine, with her masculine and her feminine. And you're able to create a new dynamic then of conscious choice. I'm going to choose to be here and see what that experience is, or choose to be here and see what that experience is, and see, you can either match those energies within a couple, or match the opposites, and see how that works, and things like that. It's definitely things that we've played with before in my experience. And yeah, so did I answer the question there? Again, it's just being able to not hold on to any fixed idea of what is, and slow down, be here, be present, be receptive to the person you're with and what's needed. And that's not every single time. There's sometimes times to claim the woman and take her, and that's a beautiful thing. But if it's only that way, then it's still skewed in a direction that's maybe not holistic, and maybe not what she wants every single time. So it's about being with what is.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. What advice have you got to men to be able to communicate better with women around intimacy and sex?
Be vulnerable. I mean, I think that's the main one, because, well, you need to also know yourself well enough to be able to be vulnerable, speaking about fears and hopes and desires and directions and whatever it is you want, being honest both with yourself and with the other. And that requires vulnerability, because it's, once you're seen, you can start to heal the bits that are holding you back. And the most beautiful thing you can have in being seen is to be held, even in whatever that expression is, because that's the highest kind of goal in love is to be whatever you are and still loved and held and seen for your experience. And that requires both your own soul searching, but also being able to bite the bullet and say the thing that you don't want to say, or because it's often backed by the fear of rejection, which is often kind of considered a masculine trait, which is what I was saying about the tantra teacher that I first started with. That was his kind of thing. It's like, you need to get okay with rejection. Yeah, that's true to an extent, but yeah, it's true to an extent, but you know, are you just numbing out at that point already? It depends whether you want a monogamous relationship or an open relationship or whatever is the scenario. It's like, are you choosing to go deep with one, in which case you're gonna be, or even if it's a select few, it's gonna require you to face things that you don't always experience, because love brings up anything other than itself. So if you're truly dipping into that space of being open-hearted with somebody, all those bits where you don't feel loved and you don't feel seen or held or anything like that are going to come up. And if you just push them aside, you haven't created anything. You've just perpetuated the story that whatever your story you created.
Do you think that men who favor open relationships are avoiding that, what you said, that depth that comes with being monogamous?
I don't think that's just men. I think that's a trait generally.
Well, we're just talking about men at this show, but yeah.
I totally get it, but balance. I'm big on balance. Yeah, look, I've been in open relationships. It didn't work for me personally. I found I never got the depth I knew from monogamy. And because my life is chosen to be one where I'm trying to unpack the things that limit me and hold me back, I choose to want to have the experience that I know comes from being uncomfortable in a longer term relationship or something like that, because the deeper somebody knows you, the more they see about who you are and where you hide, and often call you out on it. And that's an opportunity to grow in yourself. So yeah, I definitely am on the more monogamous side, and I definitely think polyamory and stuff is possible. I've very rarely seen it, because I've often just seen it done unhealthily, where people are hurt in the scenario. Maybe it's not the person who's polyamorous, but they may be in denial or not see the hurt that's around. And so then what's the point? Is it just selfishness and just getting own needs fulfilled and things like that? So that I find that, yeah, I think there's a possibility. I just don't know that humanity's at that point at this time to do polyamory well. Because as I say, the scenarios I've seen more often than not are not amazingly great. But again, I wouldn't tell anyone not to have the experience, because you need to figure out what's okay for you. It's just about being aware of all parties in all situations of, are they doing the work to be okay with this? Otherwise, am I just perpetuating my own story, or blah, blah, blah. So yeah, that's why I tend to go on the monogamous side, because I found that when I had multiple partners, I never got depth, and that allowed me to hide out in more superficial areas, or gratification, personal gratification areas, or about the physical.
Yeah, I guess the evolution of, the sexual journey parallels spiral up of the conscious individual as well, right? You know, as you said, it's about exploration and how does that feel and how does that align with integrity and the truth within me and what I want from being open-hearted. And as people heal their own wounds, they're ready to face their own depth within maybe a monogamous relationship. Is there any more to be said around that, Ben?
Yeah, no, and I've seen the amount of times I've seen polyamorous people, when they fall in love, they stop being polyamorous. You know, and it's quite a common thing until maybe it gets too hard again, and then it's maybe like closed for a couple of years and then opens up again because you're at your limit of how much you're really willing to drill into your own depths, is kind of my experience of seeing it that way. But yeah, I think if you want to challenge those bits that get uncomfortable, being held in a monogamous space is probably, if your bent is towards unpacking as much as possible in this lifetime to be moving forward. Yeah, I feel that that's where it's at.
Yeah, definitely. Great insights there. I'm also interested in, because you said you used to smoke a lot of pot, and this conversation has come up a few times. So I do like to ask the individual, do you smoke any now, or are you fully sober?
Very occasionally. Yeah, it's
okay.
Take it or leave it.
So my question is, there's a lot of people on this spiritual journey who like to use pot as an expansive connection to source. And there's others that say it's still an avoidant, it's still a numbing device. What's your opinion around this?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I've definitely had a long journey with pot. If I have it now, it's more on the edible spectrum of, I find, rather than the quick spike in really up and then it tapering off quite quickly from smoking, having a journey with it, which is a couple of hours from an edible, it is a bit more what I prefer, because then I'm able to digest the different stages or see where it is trying to show me something. And that's all I use it for every now and again. Like, I use all plants every now and then. There's certain scenarios I think it's good for. And I suppose it depends on how often it's used as well. Because if it was daily, then there's definitely going to be something you miss. And if it's the only way for you to have a spiritual experience or connect with spirit on that constant a basis, yeah, I think you're missing something. If it's the odd occasion where it's like, it helps me put pieces together, and that's what I think of most plant medicines. They help. Maybe I can see the jigsaw pieces, the jigsaw puzzle from a bird's eye view. Like, I know what I'm trying to get to, but maybe I'm too focused on individual pieces and I don't see how they fit together. When I take plants, it feels like chunks of that picture come together, if that makes sense. Yeah, that's kind of the analogy I see it as if you think that any plants are the journey, they're not. They may inform parts of your journey or where you need to do work, or help you get an overview, or help you move certain kinds of things, but don't ever mistake them for being the work. The work still comes down to you sitting with what is, and that's without distraction, without needing to have any kind of substance to get you there. That's what I believe about all plants. So yeah, I don't think they are the journey, but they can inform the journey if used properly, and probably less than more.
Fascinating. Great. Thanks for that. Ben, anything else that we haven't touched on before we start wrapping up that you feel is important to bring into this conversation?
certainly not that's jumping out at me in this sort of moment. I think we've covered a pretty good gamut of what I experience as being a man, and what certainly I've seen working with people over the years, what I think works and what doesn't. And again, this is just my experience and my opinion, and I certainly don't hold anyone to have the same experience. It's all our own individual journey to figure out what is good for you and what's right and how that works and how that looks.
I did have one question that I didn't say before. When you spoke about the masculine penetrative energy, and you feeling into and coming to an awareness of what that is, how would you describe that?
Yeah, a couple of things come up there that first teacher that I had, that was men are men, and that's how it is, that they penetrate the world. He would get us to give a woman an orgasm by touching her toe. You know, that we had to so deeply penetrate her energy that without touching any erotic areas or diving into anything sexual whatsoever, and this is paired with random people at a workshop, that you could bring them to orgasm. And that was kind of what really clicked that piece of the masculine over to me. And that's why I said he was a master at knowing energy and how to manipulate it on some level, because I don't think he was the healthiest of doing that sometimes. But it made me see the true force of what is the potential for the masculine. And I think that's translates as how the masculine approaches life, about how going for what you want. This is going for, you know, whether it's career or station or a person that you're wanting to pursue, or goals, dreams. And this is why having the more rigid boundaries around, well, I'm going to do this because it's going to get me to here. It's the masculine is more goal oriented, and then that's often considered a straight line, whatever direction, doesn't really matter. But it's, whereas the feminine's considered the receptive, open, more fluid, go any which way to get to where I want to go, often listening to intuition and things like that. Whereas the masculine is like, right, this is what I'm going to do, this is where I'm going to go, and this is how I'm going to do it. And I think that's how I see that. And this is all analogy, obviously, to sex on some level, but it's how the masculine penetrates life and how they can choose to operate in scenarios and things like that. As I've spoken about, I often think that there's a balance needed. I like to create this is where I'm going, this is how I'm going to get there, but I'm open to things coming on the process. Because I think if we're too rigid, we can sometimes like miss the forest for the trees type thing, because it's only looking narrowly at a small window. This is how I'm going to get from A to B. But maybe Z to X to K is more informative because there's something you may miss by being too direct. So that's where I see how the masculine penetrates life and penetrates reality, and how it needs to be balanced with something else, because too focal point can miss the journey, in my experience.
And I've got all the men in my ear saying, give me some tips on how I can give a woman an orgasm just by touching her toe.
It really is just that. It was a very fascinating process. It's like, how deeply still can you be in yourself is the beginning of it. And it was very much like, imagine the body part you're touching is a vagina, and like the body part you're touching of the person you're with is a vagina, and the body part, like the fingers or whatever, imagine they're a penis and that's penetrating. And it was just, how deeply can you embody that experience? Because it's all visualization. It's all how much you can embody these energies as opposed to anything else. And your own depth, and how much do you want it? And that's analogy for life, and penetrating and getting what you want as well. That it's like taking the time, taking the space, trying to work out. And obviously your partner needs to be in an open, receptive place, because if you're trying to match energies, obviously that's not really going to work. So creating the scenario that she can be in the surrendered space to feel it, to begin with, can create the scenario where it's all about your depth. Because even meditation is considered one of the masculine traits, because it's about a direction. Like it's discipline. It's going up as opposed to going into the matter of the feminine, often considered the feminine.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Explain it for you.
Yeah. So yeah, well, let's wrap up now, Ben. First of all, please let people know where they can find you, and then I'll ask you to deliver a final message to men that are maybe going through a rough time at the moment.
Yeah, so I often on Facebook is probably the easier way for me to be found, but also my website, if you ever want to get in contact for sessions and stuff like that, is bengair.com, bengair.com. And yeah, Facebook, I'm not really on Insta or anything else at the moment. That may change. I also have a podcast as well. What does it mean to be human? So that's available if everyone. It's any topic and all open to my experience of the world. So if you want to hear a bit more of my insights, that's on YouTube and
We'll drop all those links.
Places where you get podcasts. And yeah, that's pretty much how you get in contact with me. And closing thoughts and words. I think, what's there is, again, what I just shared of the name of my podcast was, What Does It Mean to Be Human? And it was called that because it's about my journey into self and what does it mean? Because there's a million different flavors. Well, there's probably 8 million, how many people on the planet? Billion people on the planet. There is no one size fits all. Whatever is the expression you want to own or become or to embody, for your being to express itself. It's okay. But knowing that if you over accentuate one place, you may be at the detriment of another. And so what it means to be human is the kind of concept of, what am I willing to put my energy into? Like, what's relevant to make me a better person? And I needed to dive deep into my masculine to get over the external story of what I should be, could be, supposed to be, to figure out what I am in that expression. How do I show up in the world? Who do I support? How does that look for me? And only you can do that. And I support every expression of every human to be whatever they want to be, just in full consciousness that you are what you choose to be. And I think once we have more people in the world that embody their essence, we can get many more flavors and see much more of reality and move forward as a species, because I think we're quite lost. And I think, there is agendas and there's stories and stuff being perpetuated, but once you become unstoppably you, we will have people that'll be bulletproof from the story and starting to embody a new reality. And that's what I want to support in the world.
So beautiful. Thank you, Ben. What a great episode. You brought so many flavors of masculine, feminine, unity, balance, the whole dynamics there through your experience. So thank you very much from my heart to yours. And everyone, thank you for watching. If you could like, share, subscribe, and I will be back in a few days with another episode of Heart Warriors. Ben, if you could just stay on for a moment, please.
No, thank you.